Hi Wild Things, welcome or welcome back to the Wilding Astro Tarot YouTube channel for another astrology video explaining the difference between whole sign and Placidus house systems. This is something I've been wanting to make a video on for a while because I think, it can be hard to find a very simple, easy explanation for why different house systems exist and what the benefits and disadvantages are for using certain house systems. And there's a way that I really like to explain it to people that I think is actually really helpful. So I thought I'd post it on YouTube for anyone who's curious or wants a very simple explanation of the difference between the house systems and potentially, some information that might help you decide which house system you're going to use. I do want to disclaim that this is going to be an extremely simplified video, so it's not going to go into all the technicality of things. And based on me trying to keep it simple, there will be a little bit of lack of nuance and lack of details in some points. But yeah, the point of the video is to try and keep it simple. I don't want to overcomplicate it because I feel like that's what happens in a lot of these YouTube videos. And it's so great that people are so smart and able to, explain all the complicated maths and things involved. But yeah, I think a really easy explanation is sometimes all you need as well. And so I'm, going to try and keep it simple. I won't go into a lot of detail. Some nuance will be missed, but if you want the nuance, there's plenty of other astrologers making long form YouTube videos that are 2-3 hours long that'll explain all the nuance. And bless them for having the patience. I simply do not. I'd much rather summarize it for people so you can get the gist, know what you need to know, and hopefully find it super helpful in understanding the different house systems. I will also talk a little bit about equal houses as well, because you can't really talk about whole sign without talking about equal houses. So this video is going to explain the difference between the systems, the main differences that you would need to know, particularly in determining what kind of system you want to use. Hopefully you find it helpful. The way I like to explain the difference between the different house systems is not through putting the house systems in little categorical boxes, but putting them on a timeline that reflects the evolution of the practice of astrology as ancient astrologers developed it alongside astronomy. Obviously, astrology is an ancient practice, and a lot of the early astrologers were also astronomers and vice versa. It was, much later that those two things became separate. And so if you look back at the timeline of kind of ancient texts relating to astrology, you'll see people talking about these different systems, and you'll see older systems like whole sign systems appearing first, and then equal house systems, and then later Placidus. And when you look at it as a timeline, of essentially the evolution of astrology, you can see how each system was essentially an evolution on the system previous to it. So it essentially fixes problems that existed in the previous system up until the point where you get something like Placidus, which is reasonably newer, that is essentially just fixing a lot of the old problems. So the way I'm going to explain the difference between the house systems in this video is to show you the timeline, essentially. And we're going to start with whole sign and then equal house systems. There were some others in between equal house systems and Placidus, but I think for the purpose of this video, I'm just going to explain, what whole sign is, what the problems with it were, why equal houses sprang up as a kind of problem solver to whole sign, and then how Placidus was an evolution on equal houses and kind of the problems that it fixes. So the very first house system that was used, as far as we know, was the whole sign house system. However, nowhere in ancient text does it actually say exactly how ancient astrologers were dividing up their charts. This is basically just an assumption based on the details they provided. Based on what they provided, the information they were providing, we are essentially assuming that they divided their house systems up in this whole sign fashion, which I'll explain to you what it looks like. But just know that although whole sign is the oldest house system, we don't actually have any proof that this is how ancient astrologers actually divided up their houses. We're just assuming based on, the information they provided. But essentially what we've assumed based on the information they provided was that essentially that they were taking the ecliptic, which is the plane on which the Earth orbits around the sun, and dividing it up into 12 equal zodiac signs and 12 equal houses. And in this system, the zodiac sign and the houses are the same. So you essentially figure out which sign was rising on the horizon at the point of your birth, and then map each zodiac sign with the corresponding house. So the sign that was rising is the first house, second house is the second sign that was coming after it, etc., all the way around the 360 degrees of the ecliptic plane. So there are a few issues with the whole sign house system, but my biggest issue with it personally is that I think it really undermines the value of angularity in the chart. So in the chart, there are 4 angles: your ascendant, your descendant, your IC, and your MC. And these all point to very specific points in the sky at the time of your birth. So the ascendant, the rising sign, points to the exact point in the sky that was rising on the horizon at the time of your birth. Descendant points to the zodiac sign that was descending at the time of your birth. IC line points to the bottom of the sky at the time of your birth, and the MC line points to the top of the sky. And these angles are really important. For example, whichever sign was rising on the horizon at the time of your birth reflects who you are going to be rising into in this lifetime. And similarly, the MC line reflects the highest point in the sky, which is also associated with your highest glory in this lifetime. And so based on that, it makes a lot of sense for the ascendant line to begin the first house of the self, and for the IC line to begin the 10th house of the career. However, using whole sign house systems, it's possible that your MC line won't even fit anywhere inside the 10th house at all, let alone start it. It's possible that your MC line could fall in the 9th or 11th house, which aren't associated with your highest calling the same way that both the MC line and the 10th house are. I just think whole sign house systems really undermine the angles of the chart. It undermines the whole 1st, 4th, 7th, and 10th houses, which we call the angular houses. So to me, using whole sign house systems just don't make sense. So it seems like the solution to this problem was the creation of the equal house system. How this system works is that each house is still allocated 30 degrees, but instead of starting at the start of the zodiac that was rising on the horizon at the time of your birth, it starts at the exact degree that was rising at the time of your birth. However, while this house system fixes the issue of your first house cusp and your ascendant not necessarily coinciding in the whole sign house system, and does make it slightly more likely that your IC and MC lines will actually fall in the respective 4th and 10th house, it doesn't solve the issue of the 4th and 10th angular houses not beginning with their angles, so not beginning with the MC, not beginning with the IC. This problem was resolved with the invention of quadrant style house divisions. So essentially the ascendant line would coincide with the first house cusp, IC would coincide with the 4th house cusp, DC would coincide with the 7th house cusp, and MC would coincide with the 10th house cusp. And then in between the angles, the space was divided equally into 3 houses apiece. I think this has a lot of merit, and if I didn't use Placidus, I think I would probably use this quadrant style of house divisions over equal house divisions or whole sign house divisions personally. However, my one critique is that I think you could argue that all of the cusps of all of the houses that aren't angular houses, so the 2nd, 3rd, 5th, 6th, 8th, 9th, 11th, and 12th, could be considered arbitrary. Like there's no real mathematical reason why the house cusps have to sit where they are, other than trying to make them equal between the major angles. In my opinion, the Placidus house system offers a slightly less arbitrary position for those house cusps. So all of the house systems that we've discussed so far are purely space-based house systems. They operate on a spatial paradigm centered on this fundamental plane of the ecliptic. The main difference between the house systems that we've already discussed and the Placidus house system is that the Placidus house system considers both space and time. It's also known as the time proportional house system of movement. The theory of this house system is that instead of using what could be considered quite an arbitrary method for determining the non-angular house cusps, given that they are literally just based on equal division of the space between the angles, instead we can use time to determine where those cusps should begin. Essentially, this system takes into consideration that the zodiac do a full 360-degree turn of this chart in 24 hours. And so the house cusps can be determined by the proportion of the daily arc that the zodiacs have traveled at a specific time at its respective location. So for example, the 12th house cusp is determined by the ascendant degree completing 1/6 of its path. And the 11th house cusp is determined by the ascendant degree completing 2/6 of its path around the zodiacal wheel, etc., etc. And the thing I like about this is that it is so time and location specific. And that all has to do with your position relative to the ecliptic plane. And that's why I dislike the critique that the time proportional division of house cusps under the Placidus system is just as arbitrary as the equal spatial division of house cusps under the quadrant house system. Because I think it should really matter what time you're born, where you're born, and from that vantage point, how the sky moves around you. One of the major criticisms of the Placidus house system that I think is totally fair is that because it is so time and location specific, trying to use it in locations closer to the poles does get a little bit ridiculous. There are adjustments for those extreme locations available. For example, places where the sun might still be up at midnight or where the sun might still be below the horizon at noon in the middle of the day, depending on the season. However, I don't love that the Placidus house system in itself kind of doesn't work everywhere perfectly. At this stage, as long as you don't live at either pole, I think it is probably the best system that we have available, just in my humble opinion. Mostly because I agree with the philosophy behind this system, which is that since life is basically motion that unfolds in stages, so too should the chart. That means dividing the chart not only by space, but also the motion of the stars. So that's why I prefer the Placidus and quadrant house systems over the whole sign and equal house systems. However, I think the reason why whole sign house systems are very popular, aside from being visually much less complicated and therefore perhaps a little bit easier to read, particularly for beginners, I don't think anything happens in isolation in astrology. As Placidus pointed out, like everything's an unfolding, everything happens in motion. While I think the Placidus interpretations are more accurate and specific, I think there is often a flow-on effect of energy from whatever the Placidus placement is into whole sign placements. For example, if you have a placement that falls in the 5th house using the Placidus house system, but the 6th house using the whole sign system, I think there often can be a like energetic flow-on effect where something will happen that's more specifically tied to that 5th house placement. However, you see some sort of like spillover effect into the 6th house, into that area of your life. Because technically that would mean that while the placement falls in the 5th house, it would technically be in the 6th zodiac sign from the rising sign, which would have a very heavy pull on the following house. So it makes sense that there's some sort of like energetic spillover effect, which I think is why the whole sign house system is not usually wrong. It's like maybe not getting at the crux of the issue. It maybe is, describing more of a weaker correlation, maybe something that's like doesn't feel as true, which I think is why, given that it's so popular, whole sign systems is so popular, why there are some astrological non-believers, because I do think the whole sign system can be a little bit less accurate and deep and specific, but I don't think there's no correlation between where things technically fall in your Placidus chart and where they might, you know, kind of metaphorically fall in the whole sign chart. I'll probably talk about that more on this channel at some point, but I think for now, like, that gives you the like basic overview on the different house systems and how they evolved and how they kind of like fixed issues that a previous house system might have had, and where there's potentially new issues with the house system, but why I like certain house systems and why I don't like others, so that you can, you know, hopefully be a little bit more like informed and educated about what these house systems are and what they represent and like where the flaws are, so that you can make an informed decision about what house system you want to use for your own personal astrology practice. And yeah, hopefully this video like simplified it enough without oversimplifying it to the point where it was like a little bit, you know, lacking in nuance. Like, I hope I walked that line okay. But yeah, that was like my best effort to like simplify it and explain it. And yeah, let you know my thoughts on the different systems and why I use what I use. And like what alternatives like are potentially like reasonably good in my eyes, as far as I'm concerned. And obviously, like, I've not been doing this forever. So I am definitely open to, changing my mind. I probably will change my mind. I tend to change my mind. So, you know, I might change my mind. And yeah, like, but for now, this is where I'm at. This is what I think. And I hope you found this helpful. And until we see each other again, ciao.